The last time I was sitting on this platform speaking on the memory of Professor Razak, Badaruddin Umar had a little while before me also spoken. Both of us were entering into our 90s, and we both realized that at this stage in our life, we have been speaking at more memorial meetings than we were used to. I personally did not expect that I would be speaking at Badaruddin Umar's memorial meeting in such a short while. As Raunak Jahan has pointed out, he had visited our house in April, and whilst he was not in the best of health, he still demonstrated a great deal of intellectual vigor, a great sense of humor, which reassured us that he was going to be with us for quite some time. Many people have spoken and written about him. I wrote a memorial piece which came out in a number of newspapers, Prathamalo, Daily Star. So I will not add a great deal of what I have already written. What I will focus on is a number of special features about Badaruddin Umar, which have already been mentioned, but I wish to emphasize them. At a personal level, Badaruddin Umar and I came together after my return from Cambridge, and perhaps a little while before he went to Oxford. But after he came back from Oxford, he joined me and Kamal Hussain and Musharraf and Salahuddin Ahmad from the history department. We set up an organization called the National Association for Social and Economic Progress. It was a small Alochana Sabha where we would get together to try to identify the then problems of East Pakistan and give ideas about what should be done about it. We brought out a number of pamphlets. One was on democracy, written by Kamal Hussain. One was on education, written by Musharraf Hussain. One was by me, written on the disparity between East and West Pakistan. And one by Badaruddin Umar on the challenge of communalism. This, in those days, was an issue with which he was deeply concerned, and of course he remained so throughout his life. But at that stage, he was still seeing himself as a teacher and as an academic. And he was chairing the political science department in Rajshahi University during the Ayub years. We met frequently, we argued a lot. Amongst all of us, Umar was more closely associated with the revolutionary element in left politics. I always thought that I was a person of the left, as did Professor Musharraf, but Umar's consciousness was more driven by revolutionary politics. And he, of course, had already taken a very sharp position after the death of Stalin and the Special Congress in the USSR, in which Khrushchev had generally denounced the tradition established by Congress, by the Stalinist party at that time. Umar, to the end, I think, remained a great admirer of Stalin and believed that the downfall of the Soviet Union originated in the deviation from the Stalinist style of politics initiated by Stalin. He, of course, then associated himself with the division in the communist movement and identified much more closely then with China, and particularly Mao Zedong. Of course, given the great transformations which have taken place also in China, where, of course, the Chinese state and the Chinese Communist Party have still remained the dominant factor and have transformed China now into the leading economic power in the world and in a position to challenge and confront the hegemony of the United States over the world order. I'm not familiar with what Umar has written about this, because as far as the classical textbook understanding of communism, the present practices of the Chinese regime have deviated very greatly from the established traditions, but it has also been much more successful than the experience of the Soviet Union. So I would have very much liked to have had understanding of how Umar interpreted this. At a moment in time when we were both elderly citizens and with sufficient time on our hands to discuss these issues, it became much more difficult to have a conversation with him because he couldn't hear anything. So any conversation that you actually had, he would speak, and he was very fluent and his mind was very sharp, but you could not communicate anything to him except by writing it down on paper. So that is not an ideal way in which to have a serious political conversation. But anyway, there it is. Perhaps Sohail may have some writings of his, or Anu may be familiar with writings of his on how he has analyzed the transformation of China and the position it has attained today. Now, what was special about Umar, it has already been pointed out, that he was both a great scholar, but also a person committed to political activism. Now, let me say something about his scholarship. He was very unique amongst the academic community in Bangladesh. Whilst for a period of time he was teaching at Rajshahi University, from 1970 down to the present, until he passed away, he had no academic affiliation. All his work, including his greatest work on the language movement and many other books that he wrote, all were essentially written in any institutional or professional support. All his works were written as a person who felt a need to say something on particular subjects and to educate people on the importance of the issues that he was writing about. So this was what I have always regarded in an academic world which is driven completely by instrumental reasons. Either you are getting funds for consultancy to write something, or you are hoping for academic advancement. I mean, those who are the biggest of scholars in the international community, most essentially do their scholarship in the expectation that their work will be published and this will advance their careers and they will be recognized and may eventually get Nobel Prizes. Umar was not driven by that culture at all. He genuinely believed in the works which he was engaged in. He wrote out of a compulsion to get across important issues, and he did it all with his own resources, meaning his own capacity to give time and to do research. If you look at the volume on the language movement, if you look at his work on the emergence of Bangladesh, the 2 volumes that he wrote, and you look at all the references and all the footnotes in that writing, I'm absolutely amazed that one person sitting at home in the middle of also a very active political life could have done such meticulous research and brought out works of such scholarship. I think in this sense, not only would I rate him as perhaps our greatest political historian, but also as an example of the vocation of a genuine scholar who does work, who does academic work for the sake of academic work without any expectation that this would advance his career. This was something of a quality which perhaps he shared with Professor Razak, who was one of the few great scholars I knew who pursued scholarship for the sake of scholarship without any compulsion to publish, without any compulsion to seek academic advancement on his own, but to pursue knowledge for the sake of knowledge. In Umar's case, unlike Professor Razak, who actually didn't publish anything, Umar was one of the most prolific writers, again, of his generation, and put in the necessary labor that was required of it. I was happy to facilitate the publication of one of his works, which was his 2-volume publication on the emergence of Bangladesh. Somewhere around the 80s or 90s, I'm not sure, he began writing a series of articles in Holiday, which were appearing weekly. I used to read that very carefully, and I was very impressed at the interesting information he was providing over there, with both historical references and first-hand or anecdotal references based on exposure to political goings-on of that time. And having read virtually everything he had written there, I told him when we met that this is a sufficiently important piece of work which needs to be put together and published in in book form, so that it can be available in libraries and to scholars who want to understand the emergence of Bangladesh, and to do so from a perspective of scholarship, but also a perspective from what came to be known as subaltern studies, looking at it from the perspective of the working class. And obviously there are many people who write about working class issues, but mostly, you may say, written for purposes of political pamphleteering. As far as Umar was concerned, he wrote about it, but he wrote about it with, again, meticulous scholarship. The amount of information he assembled in the first volume in particular on working class movements, which had become an important but forgotten part of the early history of Bangladesh, was really quite remarkable. And for a person like myself, who was an observer of both history and politics, he brought to my knowledge and understanding more about that period's history than anyone else I have come across. Perhaps Qamaruddin Ahmad would be another person. Now, he did, so when I asked him to convert his holiday writings into a book, he said that, well, it will take a lot of work, but who will publish it? Because it was written in a very provocative and controversial style, and of course, virtually every major political leader would disagree with what he was writing. So he didn't think that anyone in Bangladesh would be willing to publish it. So I said that then it's a sufficiently important work of history. Let me approach an international publisher, and I knew Oxford University Press's managing director in Pakistan, where they had become very distinguished publishers of books, both not just on Pakistan but on South Asian history. They, for example, have published a memoir of Dr. Kamal Hussain. So I spoke to the editor, and they very gladly took it up, and they have bought out several editions of the book, which became a bestseller in Pakistan. After they discontinued the copyright on that, then Cambridge University Press in India actually published the same book. And this gave readers in India exposure to that history. And then I think a local publisher in Bangladesh also published it. So these were works where I remember him telling me that whilst I've written these as articles in Holiday, if I have to publish this as in a book form, then I have to do all the footnoting so that I can provide all the references which I did not need to do when I was writing in a newspaper. And he did all that. I was again amazed at how he could have assembled the material and the discipline required to in fact do that sort of work. So I recognize him, and I think he will be recognized and immortalized in Bangladesh as one of our most serious scholars, and certainly a scholar who has elevated the writing of our political history to a higher level. Now, the second area where I want to recognize him is that he again was one of the very few academics who made the full transition from the world of academia into politics. Now, there are many of us who have been academics, who have engaged in politics, who write about it, who participate in political activism, but who have never actually moved fully away and completely immersed themselves in politics. Now, for people coming from a middle-class background, That is not an easy thing to do, because unless you have vast inherited wealth, I understand that quite a number of leaders of the Communist Party in Bengal came from zamindar backgrounds. I think Jyoti Basu was one of them, if I'm not mistaken, who had reserves to sustain full-time political activism. In Umar's case, he had no such support system. He himself actually, you do not know this, he came from what could be regarded as a political aristocracy. His great-grandfather, his grandfather Abul Qasim, and of course his father Abul Hashim, were all major figures in Bengal politics. His grandfather was actually originally with the Congress party, but then moved over, I think, to Muslim League politics. And his father played a historic role in the 1946 elections in India, which was absolutely crucial for the emergence of Pakistan. Hussain Sohrawardi was then the Prime Minister of undivided Bengal and the President of the Bengal Muslim League, and Abul Hashim, Umar's father, was the General Secretary of the Muslim League. And their great contribution to Muslim League politics was they took it away from the control of the feudal leadership of people like Khaja Nazimuddin and the business leaders of Kolkata, such as the Adamjis and Isfahanis and others. And they reached out to the middle class and lower middle class and even the working class constituencies of Muslim Bengal. And they brought about a transformation in the election campaign, reaching out to this much broader constituency. And this was a very crucial factor in getting a massive support in Bengal. In fact, in case many of you are not aware, Bengal was probably the only area where the Muslim League actually won the 1946 election. They did not win it in Punjab. They did not win it in the northwest frontier. And they had a coalition situation in Sindh. So the only place where they actually were victorious was in Bengal. And Abul Hashim played a very crucial role there. But of course, various conspiracies took place on the eve of Pakistan, and both Sohrawardi and Hashim were marginalized. So Umar's exposure to politics then came via his political ancestry. Another strand in his ancestry from his mother's side was that the Hussain Sohrawardi was his mama, in the sense that his mother and Hussain Sohrawardi were first cousins. So from whichever way you look at it, he had a pedigree for getting into elite politics in the then East Pakistan, which he chose not to do. He became a radical, moved into and developed a communist consciousness, and all in direct contradiction to his father's beliefs, who was himself in Pakistan, again began moving rightwards, and for a brief period of time actually joined the Muslim League under Ayub Khan. Umar, I remember, was deeply embarrassed by that and said that he had spent many hours arguing with his father to dissuade him from actually doing so. However, be that as it may, in all our discussions and debates, he was always arguing that if you want to go anywhere and you want to be influential, then you have to actually engage in the political process. And everyone talks about getting into politics, but no one is willing to make the big jump where you give up a secure academic position and you actually then de-link yourself and accept all the risks and hazards of politics. But Umar chose to do that in a time when a major transition was taking place in 1970, in which he quit his job at Rajshahi. He came to Dhaka, and of course he joined the party and he became editor of the party newspaper, as Anu has pointed out. Now, the problem with what he did then was that the main burden of that has to be borne by the family. If you do not have accumulated wealth, all he had was the salary of a professor at Rajshahi University. You have to support the family. And Omar's wife, Thoraiya, who had barely not worked before, we arranged a job for her in a bank at that time. And for many years after that, she continued working in the bank and being an important source for supporting the family. Umar has, of course, pointed out to us that it is unfair to say that he depended on his wife's earnings, because he himself earned prolifically because of the royalties he got from his writings. His book on the language movement is into God knows how many editions and is still on the market today, as is his books, other books, both in West Bengal and over here and all over India. And this has bought him a fair amount of royalties which could be contributed. So he was widely read, widely admired. He is a cult figure, not just here, but in West Bengal, where most people in the left are familiar with his writings. So he made, and he remained loyal to this. I mean, the amazing thing was that from the age, from 1970 down to the present, he never had a regular job. He was fully engaged in political activities, and he remained committed to this form of political engagement. So here was a great scholar. Here was a person who could have become anything from internationally recognized professor to a vice-chancellor of a university, but who exclusively devoted all of what would be about half a century of his life in active politics. And this was not just active politics of sitting at home and writing articles. He was going into the field all the time. Sohail will be familiar with the problems in those days where periodically his father would disappear and go off with his party workers to some part of rural Bangladesh, and they were never sure when he would actually come back. So this was the sort of life he led. This was the tensions and insecurities which were there in a family, because if you are engaging in frontline politics, then it is not only that you are physically absent, you are also in physical danger at all times when you are living in a violent and lawless society, as much of Bangladesh's history has tended to be. So in those circumstances, to have been an active politician of the left was, I think, a remarkable tribute to Umar and his genuine commitment to the politics in which he firmly believed. Let me conclude by saying that where I think it is very important to carry on this story is to do a proper evaluation of his work as a politician. I think his work as a scholar will be independently recognized, and I'm sure people will use it and write about it. But what needs to be much more carefully explored, and I hope people like Anu can initiate younger people to take on work like this under perhaps his direction, is to look at his political works and to then link it up with his political activism, because he was not writing on politics in an academic sense. It had a politically instrumental purpose. And how far, therefore, his political thinking and writing conditioned the type of politics he actually engaged in. And in this process, you will be perhaps also revisiting the history of left politics in Bangladesh. Because here was a person who was fully engaged in the front lines of left politics over 50 years. And how left politics evolved, the progressive fracturing of the left, the Moscow-Peking conflict, the conflicts within the different groups of the left, then the compromises of the left where all the revolutionary leaders of yesterday ended up working with either the Zia's political party or Irshad's political party, or finally the party of Sheikh Hasina. How they all eventually compromised themselves and contributed to the withering away of the left. So why and how this happened is worth understanding, because if I look back on the world of what I thought to be Bengal or East Pakistan at that time, all our consciousness and all our thinking believed at that time that if there was any part of the world where major progressive revolution would take place, it was in what eventually became Bangladesh. And that was the expectation and consciousness at that time. The fact that not only did that not happen, we moved in completely the opposite direction and are at a point where the wheel is about to come full circle. This merits very serious analysis, both from scholarship and for a purpose of understanding left politics. That how was it possible that in a country which was poised for a major and radical transformation, we never really got there. And how, from that point of view, a person with the commitment and engagement of someone like Badaruddin Umar could then have had so little influence in shaping the direction of both left politics and national politics. I think this would be a very important work and a recognition also of the problems of engagement where academics seek to involve themselves directly in the political process. He himself represents a case history of that particular experience. I shall personally continue to remember him as a dear friend. We began our relationship over half a century ago, and we shall miss him as a friend, but remember him as a scholar, a committed human being, a person of deep belief, and above all, a person of great decency. Thank you.